The final thing we're going to talk about pertaining to jQuery selectors is some additional flexibility when it comes to selecting DOM nodes. There's going to be times where you want to select some nodes based on the text they contain, or the attribute starts with or ends with or contains different text. So to this point, we've only looked at how can you select tags based on a specific tag name, or how do you select based on an ID or class name. There was a little bit of flexibility when it came to attribute selection, since you could say select for this or select based on this string, but you had to have that whole string. It wasn't starts with or ends with or those types of things. So let's take a look at a few different features of jQuery when it comes to selectors that you can apply to your programs. So the first one is the contains. Now contains allows you to search a given element for specific text. So in this example, you'll notice that we're going to search for a div, but we don't just want all divs. We want to select a div where that particular div contains the text pluralsight somewhere in the text. It could start it, it could end it, it could be in the middle, doesn't really matter. Now it is a case sensitive search, so be aware of that, because I've beat my head against the wall for a few minutes figuring out that particular point before. But in this example, we have a div, we have export pluralsight training / div. Well, what that'll do is that would match this particular div. Now if it's the only div that has the word pluralsight in it, then that's all that would be returned. The other divs would simply be ignored because of course they don't contain that text. So that can be very useful when you need it. Another one that's also very useful, I tend to work a lot with rows and columns, columnar data in line of business applications. And oftentimes you might want to highlight for either highlighting to make it easier to read or for some other purpose the different rows. Well, you could do a lot of this with CSS, but what if you want conditional highlighting? Based on this condition, highlight the even rows or the odd rows or whatever it may be. Well, fortunately, jQuery provides two really useful features, :odd and :even, that can be applied. Now, all rows are 0 base, so you have 0, 2, 4, 6, 8, that would be your even rows. And you have 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, and up, and that would be your odd rows. And simply by saying go find TRs and then doing :odd, that will return the set of odd rows, or vice versa, you could do even. Then you could apply styles or change the HTML of those or whatever it may be to do what your application requires. So I'll show an example of this in the demo in just a moment. Very, very useful though, and something that I find a good technique to know about. Now the last three things I'm going to talk about are going to be related to attributes. Very cool stuff for selecting text. But there's one final one I want to talk about with regard to elements before we move into attributes, and that is first child, last child, and you can even find children in the middle. So there may be times when you want to find some spans, but you only want to highlight maybe the first child, if it's a span, throughout your entire page for whatever reason. Well, you'll notice in this particular example we're using yet another selector that we haven't seen to this point, where we're going to say go find all spans, but we want to filter it down to the first child. And so if you look into this down here at the bottom, you'll see that we have two divs, and each div has two spans. But what we want to do is just select that first span within each parent. Now it doesn't have to be just that. It could be a TD tag, and maybe you have a span inside of several columns, and you want to highlight those as well. What matters though is that we're automatically allowing jQuery to filter based upon some criteria such as first child, last child, or there's an EQ, it equals, to give it a specific position of the children. And I'll show some of this as we walk through the demos here. Makes it very easy to work with though to find your children without having to write hardly any JavaScript code, as you can see. So the last three things I want to show you are related to attribute selectors. So we've already talked about attribute selectors, but everything we talked about, they had to contain a very specific string. So what I'm going to show you here is that you can select attribute based on attribute where the attribute starts with or ends with or contains a specific value. So here's the syntax. You'll do that kind of where clause, as I refer to it as, where the attribute name starts with. Now this is the caret symbol, and if you've done regular expressions before, this will look pretty familiar. If you haven't, just use the caret symbol. So the caret symbol followed by an equals allows you to do this starts with. So the example shown here is we want to go find all inputs where the value of the input starts with events. And so if we had these, in this case, 3 buttons, then because these all 3 start with events, this would automatically allow us to go into those and work with them. Makes it really easy to do what you need to do there. Likewise, we can go in and say, hey, I want to find where it ends with. So instead of using the caret, you can just go in and do the dollar. Again, that comes from regular expressions. So now we'll say, go find me an input where the value attribute ends with the word events. Coming down to here, now it's nice because the world, national, and local might dynamically be generated for us. Maybe you're using PHP or Perl or whatever it may be to generate the HTML. And you don't have to worry about what it starts with. You just know it contains, or ends with in this case, the word events. Very simple. And then I just alluded to the final one, which is you can also go in and say, hey, find me everything that contains the text events. And to do that, you simply use a star. And so very similar, you say attribute value, or name of the attribute, star equals the value. So in this case, we want to find all the inputs where the value attribute contains the text events. So you'll notice in this example, we have world events, national events, local events. It would find all 3 of those and go ahead and return it. So that's an example of using contains outside of attributes with like divs. We looked at how you can do first child, last child, those types of things. And we also saw the odd and even functionality. That's really nice when you have a set of children. And I showed it with TRs. But keep in mind that could be used for all kinds of things. LIs in the case of an unordered list and stuff like that. So, and then finally we talked about 3 different flexibility features when it comes to attribute selectors for starts with, ends with, and contains. So let's take a look at an example of using some of these in a demo application.